Hey guys, what's going on? Nananki here, bringing you some more Kerbal Space Program. I recently got back into this game, and I didn't really record enough to do a real good, like, how-to or anything, but I did build some ridiculously large rockets and ran into some rather interesting failures, and I recorded bits and pieces of it. Like I was making a progressively staged rocket where each fuel tank fed into the next one, so I could drop them off sequentially, and when I got to this stage I had a few problems. I'd say it was mainly due to the fact that there were not enough struts. That was my initial assumption, was that if I just add more struts and hold it together more solidly, we won't get so much flex in the system and it won't drive itself to spin out of control. So I did, I added more struts, and I kind of thought that had solved the issue, until once again I got to the stage. Now that I look at it, it kind of looks like a particular symbol that I was totally not intending to make. We'll just ignore that. Look, it all explodes, right? So that's good enough. That's what you're here for, hopefully, to see some things explode, because that's the primary content of this video. At this point in the build process, in fact, the main thing I was concerned with was how far the center bit there with all the atomic rocket motors on it would go if I could get it to orbit. That's why I was still trying to get this thing up, even though it had ridiculous rotation. And I really thought that if I could just get it into orbit, that's fine. I'll test the middle section, I'll move back to getting the lifter stable later. I just wanted to try to go somewhere with it and see what kind of delta V I would get out of 20 atomic rocket motors on this giant stack of fuel tanks, because these new fuel tanks are absolutely gigantic. They carry obscene amounts of fuel compared even to the old orange tanks, which I used to think were huge. So I tried the quick and dirty method of just tossing some motors on the side of the thing to keep it from spinning, to counter the rotation, and as awful a solution as that is, and as inelegant a solution as that is, it still wasn't even sufficient. Even covered in winglets to try to get the rotation to stop. You know, 4 motors was too much, so I put 2 on there, and I limited their thrust, and I thought, you know, I could just turn them on and off and kind of keep it going straight, and it's not elegant, it's not pretty, but it'll get me into orbit, and that's good enough. I can finagle it and get it working. But as you can see there, obviously I did not have enough thrust on just the 2 motors, because despite their activation and functioning, it was still rotating against the direction of those engines. Plus, I ended up with a bunch of tilt, because by turning one of them on and off, I ended up with uneven fuel consumption, which kind of defeats the whole purpose in the first place, because then you end up angling against the direction you want to, and with the thing spinning, it's exceptionally hard to get it pointed straight again. So I made a few more alterations, put some more struts on there, some more winglets. Same problem, still rotating upon decoupling. But I still kind of thought at this point, you know, if I can just get over the process of getting to orbit, it'll be cool. I was coming to grips at this point with the fact that the initial launch system was deeply flawed, and I was going to probably have to rework it from scratch, and it was dysfunctional for reasons I wasn't entirely certain of, because even after the uneven third tanks are dropped, even when it goes down to just a big X type of shape, or plus, depending on how you're looking at it, it still had too much rotation. There were still, like, mystery forces that were making me twist. Like, when I turn those rockets off, and if I speed up the video slightly, you see it immediately kind of straightens out and then starts turning to the left again. But at this point, I'd been messing with this design for well over an hour, just trying to get the big giant tanks lined up and straight and strutted on, and the fuel fed appropriately and correctly. I just wanted to see what I could do, how far I could get with the middle section, which is 2 of the largest sized fuel tanks, then with 20 atomic rocket motors on the bottom. And the reason for that is not just the gratuitous desire to have an inordinate number of rockets, or engines on my rocket, I should say, but also because the atomic rocket motors, although they are very, very efficient, they have a very high specific impulse, or ISP as it's abbreviated, so they make the best option for deep space usage, or space to any depth. But at the same time, they have very low thrust. They only get a maximum of 60 thrust, whatever that number represents or correlates to. And you can't even run them at maximum or they explode. They overheat, so you have to run them slightly below that. So you're really looking at like a maximum of about 55 thrust per engine, which is pretty low in the scale of things. To put that in perspective, the large motors that are part of the launch system, I think, get 2,500 thrust. So it's vastly more powerful to just have one of those, but they get far less efficient specific impulse, so you end up burning up your fuel quicker, so you end up actually getting more range out of the atomic motors, even though they don't have very much kick to them. So that's what I wanted to use for space, but I don't want to have to make 10-minute long burns to head toward whatever I wanted to head toward. And I wanted to see if I could get, like, from the inner reaches of the solar system to the outer reaches and back with just that stage, so I wouldn't have to send, like, refueling trips mid-mission to supply additional fuel for the return trip. I'd like to be able to take enough fuel to not just make the trip to the planet I want to visit, any planet I want to visit, or moon for that matter, but then enough to return to Kerbin safely, ideally, because I don't like to strand my Kerbals in space. They were all prepared for that eventuality. They all signed up with the knowledge that this mission could be their last. They could be stranded in deep space forever. They don't seem to have a problem with that. They seem to have no requirements of food or oxygen, though they do have those helmets on, so maybe that's just head protection, because they need that, certainly, in my space program. As you can see there, I just crashed into the planet Jool, which is like the Jupiter analog of the Kerbin system. And after that, I started working on a lander that could land after arriving at these places, especially up on a planet with an atmosphere, because I already had a moon lander, this one right here, that was worked out pretty well. In fact, to get enough science to do the research for the high efficiency in an atmosphere engine, the toroidal aerospike engines, I'm probably mispronouncing that, I made another trip to Minmus to collect science, as per the new career mode system. I'm not playing the career mode with money, the new .24 version, because the money is restrictive and it doesn't let me build ridiculously large craft. It looks like it's going to be fun because there's various missions in it, but this right here is the most science and successful collection mission I've managed to perform yet. I managed to collect about 1,700 science in one trip, which gave me enough, as I said, to unlock the aerospike engines. Yeah, toroidal aerospikes. I'm pretty sure that's close enough to the right pronunciation. You know what I'm talking about. These dealies right here. So I was able to start constructing my lander and tested it to see if you could drop it a reasonable distance and not have it explode. And I didn't overly strut the thing up, which immediately became apparent. I love the wibble wobble effect. Like the engines partially merged with each other and everything else, and I thought, oh good, the crew cab survived. Nah, it didn't. It fell that far and it was cool, but it couldn't slide down a tiny hill. So I changed a few things. This time I just left it throttled up just to see what it would do. And I have to admit, I love the spectacular crashes in Kerbal Space Program. So I added a couple more struts, not overdoing it too much. And at this point in the video, you'll hear some random music playing. That's because I was playing music while I was playing. I kind of forgot that by recording the audio of the game, I would be recording also any audio I was playing on the computer at the time, which included the random songs that you'll hear for the rest of this video, which is why I'm not going to shut up for even a second, because I am afraid of the copyright kraken that will come and eat my video if YouTube detects any kind of copyrighted music of any kind, which it is rather sensitive at finding. So even with engines going and other sound effects, I want to make sure that there's not a single moment during which there is only the audio of the episode, or else Google, or, well, it is Google since they own YouTube, will come after me and either send me 100 notices telling me to take it down, or I'll get a message from somebody, some company, some Warner group or something telling me that I have to enable ads and give them the proceeds, because, my channel clearly is going to make them a lot of scratch. It's very important that they get the 7 cents that those ads would earn them. For those of you wondering, that's why I stopped my Legend of Zelda series, because I was getting dozens of notices per video from Nintendo and whoever else Nintendo has contracted to scan the interwebs to disallow any and all of their music from being utilized, even though I was playing my actual SNES copy of the game on my actual SNES, all legitimately purchased for a game that isn't even around. I mean, I guess you could buy newer versions on, like, the DS or something, but, I mean, it's a game from 1991. Like, really? You're really gonna tell me I can't play this on my YouTube channel? Anyway, eyes rolling. Back to Kerbal. In the end, I did go back to the drawing board and completely re-engineered the entire launch system from scratch. I got one put together that was completely effective at getting to orbit in a straight line without needing dozens of countermeasures to combat rotation and flipping and other various issues. I didn't really record any of that. It was kind of a long process of very small, subtle refinements and experimentation. The thing that I ended up kind of discovering was primarily responsible for the rotation was the angle of the the main center engines, if they were all, since they're kind of rectangles, the arrangement of the 4 engined large engines, simply by making them face alternate directions, like one is laid out horizontally, the one to the right of it is vertical, the one to the south of that is horizontal, the one to the left of that is vertical, completely eliminated my rotation. I was like, cool, that works for me. And what you see here is what happened when I copy-pasted that chunk, that subassembly, the entire lifting section, onto my lander and just stuck the lander on top. Didn't bother getting anything detailed set up at this point, just was trying to make sure it was going to work, and for some reason every time I added it, it put the struts like halfway between the different sections that had struts going completely between them, and so when I was launching it, it was tearing itself apart in a spectacular fashion, and I recorded it like 5 or 6 times, because after working on it so long and having it working perfectly, then to have it completely fail to even get off the ground in one piece, I was kind of enjoying watching it tear itself apart. Like, you know what? That's fine. Do it. Go for it. Knock yourself out. Just blow up into a million pieces. Just rain destruction and debris upon the entire center. That's fine. I wasn't disgruntled at all. It was totally cool. In the end, it ended up being a simple fix. All I had to do was reapply the subassembly after exiting the program completely and loading it back up to get it to apply correctly the struts and everything else. Then the staging wasn't quite right. You saw just a moment ago when the engines for the lander were firing during the ascent process. Like, that's not what I intended, but it didn't matter. I thought that landing was kind of good. That's why I tossed that in there. Once I did get all of the struts and everything else lined up properly so that the entire thing went up together and not in chunks and pieces that then exploded, then my priority was to add a coupling docking port on the thing so that I, after landing on the planet, presumably, that I am visiting and then returning to orbit, I can dock with the main drive section and fly back to Kerbin. Unfortunately for me, the docking clamps don't have nearly the structural integrity that the normal assembly pieces do, so it was bending and breaking under the force of liftoff, and even in orbit, when I took it really gently to get up, it was still wanting to break into pieces, and that used way more fuel because I wasn't flying at anywhere nearly the most optimal speed because I was so tentative with the throttle. I was spending a lot of time in the gravity well. Even though I wasn't fighting the atmosphere at those slow speeds, you end up burning up extra fuel because you're spending an unnecessary amount of time in the gravity well of the planet. You know, the most efficient way to fly a rocket through an atmosphere is to be moving at terminal velocity the whole time, the rate at which an object would fall under its own gravity, because that way you're not fighting the atmosphere unnecessarily, and you're also not spending any more time in the intense gravity than you have to. And that's the magic amount of speed you want to maintain. Of course, I don't know what those speeds are without dropping a rocket of various constructions from various heights. Plus, this game seems to care more about mass when it comes to aerodynamics than it does the shape of things. Like, I don't think the nose cones even matter. But, you know, you do what you gotta do, and it looks prettier that way, so I've got them on there. But more on topic, as you can see, there's all kinds of chunks of metal there around the docking port, which hold it together during launch, but it made it exceptionally difficult to get a docking successful. And in fact, when I got it lined up, the game lagged itself out, and it did come back, and I was docked, but it took so long to do it, I was like, man, that seems like it might want to crash, and the last thing I want it to do is crash after a successful mission to another planet like Duna or Eve, you know, the Mars and Venus analogs of the Kerbin system. So I redesigned it one more time, bent those outward a little bit, made a little bit more space for the docking clamps, and that was successful. And now that we've been through all the explosions, the next episode of Kerbal Space Program will be a live recorded commentary of me going to maybe Eve, I think, perhaps, since I've read that is the most difficult planet to get off of and back into a successful orbit from, due to it having higher than Kerbin's gravity and a very thick atmosphere, like a soup. So next time, Eve's soupy atmosphere is my destination. Thank you so much for watching. I do greatly appreciate it. As always, do like it if you liked it, and I will catch you next time. Peace.